when you get out in the real world, you have your expertise and you have your, professional training, but it really truly does take everyone, and it takes collaboration and understanding that, you might understand the dietetics of it, but someone else understands, the social features of it in a different way and with different depth than what you do.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2B podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome back to another week of the RD2B podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. It's our podcast where each week we sit down with a different registered dietitian to highlight the diversity of opportunity in the profession. Right now, we're featuring dietetic internship programs, so really giving an in-depth view at certain programs for those prospective students, wherever you're at on your journey, looking to maybe apply very soon or apply way down the road. So we're super excited to be sitting with Laura Brubaker today. She's from Bowling Green State University. I'm really interested to hear about your program and your unique background. I'm really excited. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great, and as always, I'm Emily, your RD2B from University of Maryland. So would you mind just giving us a brief background as to how you got into this role?
Wow, that is such a loaded question. So I have I think it's fun when you meet people in this profession, they almost always say, I have an unconventional route to getting here. And so I feel like that's more the norm than the exception to the norm, that it seems to be unconventional in that route to becoming a dietetics professional and however that looks. So for me, it started out I suppose the longest version is I worked in a food service long-term care facility that was about 2 blocks from my house when I was in high school. It was a quick job. We were out by 8 p.m. after we served the dinner meal. It was walking distance from my house and I just really enjoyed it. Friends were there and that type of thing. And I remember that every so often an individual would come in a lab coat and just I just remember just being very smart looking. And I was like, who is that person and what do they do? And someone said, well, that is the dietitian. And I was like, I have never heard of such a thing. So that was my first exposure to a dietitian. And then, as life continues to go on, that role in the food service department then became a lead cook, which then led to an opportunity to be a dietary manager. And then when I was in the dietary manager position at a different long-term care facility, just after high school, it was mentioned that I could either get the CDM, the Certified Dietary Manager Certificate, which at that point in time was 18 months, or the associate's degree, dietetic technician, which was 2 years, which makes the most sense to you. So my husband and I kind of went, I'm thinking the 2 year, it's only 6 months difference and I'll have an associate's versus a certificate. And he's like, yeah, I'm on board. So that led me to going back to school for my first time in my early 20s with, I think, only one child on board, and got the associate's degree and intended fully to go back to work right at that point in time. And 2 kids turned into 4 kids, and a house turned into a job transfer for my husband, and 3 years at home with 2 kids turned into 13 years at home with 4 kids. So when kid number 4 put on his backpack, I'm skipping a beat here. So I was home for those 13 years, and then I decided to go. I had not taken the DTR certification at that point, so we had to take the registration test. Never took it from that, getting that associate's degree, because life happened and kids happened. And so I decided to go ahead and do that and pass the DTR exam. And I ended up, at the end of the day, ended up working 8 years in long-term care facilities as a consultant dietetic technician underneath the dietitian. But 6 of those years were actually me going back to school, working on my bachelor's degree and then my master's degree, and then the on-site internship. And what happened there was when I was a dietetic technician, I had a very, very complicated case that had, all of the chapters of every book, from sepsis to dehydration to tube feed to the renal, everything, every chapter that you would get a single case study was all in this one particular patient. And I went to the nurse's station and they wanted me to adjust tube feed orders. And I was just not feeling very confident. And I said, can you please have the doctor check this? And they said, oh, honey, doctors don't check that. That's all on you. And so I said, all right, I'm going back to school again. So I went back to school for a second time. That was when BGSU, which is actually now in my backyard at that point, because we had moved. So it's only just less than a mile away. I met the folks who were my instructors and who have now become my colleagues, and finished my undergrad. So I got my bachelor's at BGSU in dietetics, and then finished my master's degree, as well as did the dietetic internship. So since the time of getting my passing the RD exam, that's been, gosh, I got my undergrad in 16, my master's degree in 18. So I started teaching adjunctly at BGSU in 18. Then COVID happened, so that was a good time. And just in the meantime, I've been the assistant to the internship director as well as adjunct teaching. And they just came up to me maybe a little over a year ago and said, hey, we have an idea. What do you think about working underneath the internship director and seeing how it goes? And I was like, can we talk about this? Like, for real? So if I didn't already say it already, so the person who, so I have been hired as the transitional internship director at BGSU, the dietetic internship director, and I will be taking over for the person who was my internship director, who I say she made me a dietitian, and she really doesn't like it when I say that. She says, you made yourself a dietitian, but I think she had a pretty big role in it, as well as the people who were once my instructors are now my colleagues. So it has been an unconventional road in so many ways. It has been surprising. It has been hard. There has been a certain level of blood, sweat, and tears, but it has been worth every single moment of it. So I guess I'll just cap it off by saying that, so I get it. I get it when people come to me and say, I didn't get here the way that I thought that I would get here. And I'd be like, oh, honey, I have like a 7-minute, explanation for how it's an unconventional road for most of us.
Most definitely. And I feel like not a lot of RDs have a traditional path. A lot of people, went on to have families and stuff like that, and then did come back or something along those lines. So what does the transition of becoming a DI director look like?
So I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for me. But I have been just wonderfully blessed by my college, by my colleagues, that I actually am shadowing the current director for 1 year. So I think that really kind of explains the depth and the different facets to how massive what I'm doing is, taking this position over is. So we are currently teaching Introduction to Internship, which at BGSU for the on-site interns, that's they meet 2 days a week, meeting competencies and preparing them to get ready for going into rotations in January. So the current director and I, we are co-teaching. She CCs me in on emails and just exposing me in every way, shape, and form that she can. And whenever I see an opportunity to jump in, I'm like, I'm on it. I've got it. I've got this covered. And she'll be like, did you do this? Yep, done. And so lots of middle of the night checking things off lists and saying, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've done that. And then I'll reach out and I'll say, hey, I think I still feel a little weak here. Can we talk this out, or can we meet about that? And so it has been an amazing transition. So I started in officially in July, and then I will take over officially in May of 2022.
Great. So what do you think makes the internship at Bowling Green State stand out compared to other programs?
So I'm going to speak on that one from the fact that I'm a past intern. And also, I was an undergrad and a graduate student, and I had the pleasure of attending the freshman class coming in for orientation for the first day this year. And the president spoke and was like, now that you're at BG, you're home. And I was like, he's really, really correct about that. So I live here in Bowling Green. So I use the community. My children have gone through the school system. Bowling Green State University kind of sits just smack dab in the middle of a somewhat small town in Northwest Ohio, right along I-75. And when you get here and you arrive at Bowling Green and you walk through the campus, it is just 100% home. So the way that kind of works out from an academic way is that we know our students by name, and we oftentimes know kind of little details about what their unconventional road, is and continues to be. And we match to like what their interest levels are. So I think one of the most exciting things is that when an intern, comes into the program, or even an undergraduate or graduate student and says, my interest area is XYZ, and we're like, okay, we can set you up with this person. Here's a contact here, and let's put you in a rotation that focuses on this interest. And if they come back and they go, I thought I was interested in this, but now I'm actually not, we're like, okay, let's change gears then. And so because we know them on that one-on-one level, we just really want to make sure that we're catering to the student's need. It's not just about matching the student to our program. We want to make sure that we are matching to what they need as well.
Most definitely. So you mentioned that you have an on-site as well as probably a distance program. So would you mind comparing and contrasting the two programs?
Yeah, so I'll just speak right now just to the dietetic internship. So yes, we run both an on-site and a distance internship program. The main difference in the two is that for the on-site interns, it's a little bit more of a competitive list. We take 6 to 8 interns per year. And then for the distance, we take up to 18. So it's a little less competitive to take the distance route compared to the on-site route. The other difference would be that the distance interns line up their own preceptors. They don't have to have all of their preceptors in place at the time of application, but we do ask that they know who their long-term care preceptor and sites will be, their acute, and their community. And then of course there are elective sites for both the on-site and the distance where they can say, hey, my interest area is maybe sports nutrition, or perhaps we've had people, we have even had students from, both programs that say, oh, I want to go and stay with a family member here for, a certain amount of time. Can I go, to another city or another, area of the country? And we're like, yep, go right on ahead. And we cater to that. So on the on-site, we will find the preceptors unless there's an elective that they want to work with, and then we'll kind of cater to that. But otherwise, for the distance, they find their own preceptors. But we do step in and say, hey, there's a contact here, or if they're struggling with something, we give some guidance.
Great. That's very, helpful, especially for those students who do want to maybe go stay in a certain region because that's where family is or where they want to end up. So
yes, we have one intern that was able to hop around and did some rotations in California and some rotations, I think it was in like Utah or something like that. So really well-rounded experience that we welcomed and definitely wanted to foster for that person.
So if they were able to go, from California to Utah and maybe other areas, how is that able to work? Because I know you guys also offer a master's that goes with your dietetic internship.
So how were they? So if they were with the distance, so the distance interns can either choose to take that, they can work on a graduate certificate, or they can work on a master's degree. So they would do the same coursework. Both on-site and distance interns will do the same coursework. It's just that the distance would do it completely remotely. And then when it comes to, I'm sorry, I got a phone call and I got distracted. Tell me the other half of your question.
So you pretty much answered it. Like I thought you mentioned that the student that was on site happened to want to go to 2 different areas for electives. So I was asking how they were able to do their master's, or if it was in person and they were able to do that, or if there was a workaround that had to happen.
So we've got many of the master's classes are offered remotely. There are some that are on site, but for the on-site interns, if that happens to be the case, we'll just work one-on-one with that particular student. For the distance, it's much more simple. Everything is remote. And when the students are, that's probably not the best way to explain it, but I was gonna say when the students are mainly in rotations, that's what they're focusing on there. They also have their master's work. But once again, generally that's going to be not completely for the on-site, but it is all online for the distance students.
Great. And then you mentioned that for your on-site students, now they're going through like the 2 classes a week, getting prepared to go on-site in January. So are they doing their master's coursework between now and December?
Yes, our on-site interns are working on their master's degree at the same time, but distance students do not necessarily need to work on their master's. They can work on a graduate certificate. The difference between the two is like 15 credit hours versus a little more than 30 credit hours, I believe, from the certificate to the master's degree. However, the distance student then decides that they want to transfer their graduate certificate credits and then do the master's. Those credits will then flip over and they can apply them.
Great. So how long is your program?
So the on-site, the master's degree is 2 years, but the certificate is 1 year. And then there is the option to go part-time for the distance students, and then that would lengthen it out a little bit. So life happens and we recognize that. So, unfortunately, sometimes medical diagnoses happen. Children happen sometimes in the middle of internship rotations, and we, certainly can adjust to those things so that, interns can meet their personal goals as well as their professional goals too.
Most definitely. So for the distance program, I know you said that you want students to have an acute, a community, and a long-term care preceptor.
Just lined up right? At the time up.
So how would a student go about doing that?
So I feel like, I don't know, maybe, everyone probably sees this from a different perspective, but dietetics is kind of a small world. And so it seems like particularly when you're in your undergrad program, there are often times when students will have a shadowing experience, maybe in a community type of class, or maybe in our life cycle classes, they have some experiences out in the community. It can also be a dietitian that there are resources, of course, even resources like RD2B. A lot of times you'll see people saying, hey, I need to line up a preceptor here, there, or whatever. We also encourage students, if they're interested in something and they don't know a soul in that realm, but they still want to learn something about it, there is just no harm in a cold call, or I guess in these days, a cold email. And I always tell my interns that here's the thing, what's the worst that they're going to say is no, right? And that you're different than the boat that you're already in. And also always remember this, every single preceptor was once in your shoes. You do not ever become a preceptor without first having to be precepted. And so they understand the value, they understand the connection. And most preceptors, they get a little bit of CPEU credits out of that, but generally preceptors are, working with dietetic interns because they've been there, they understand the importance of it, and they want to, give back to what was given to them once upon a time.
Definitely. And I feel like another big thing students also have questions about that they don't really know how to navigate is finances. So what kind of advice would you have for students who are struggling to figure out finances when they want to consider going into a dietetic internship?
That one can be a tough one. So I actually reached out to my colleagues and I was like, hey, what kind of suggestions do we have kind of collaboratively as a group? And so of course there's scholarships from the academy that can be applied for all interns. There's also foundation scholarships as well. There can be scholarships throughout the student's university or other universities. I actually had earned a scholarship because I was a post-traditional student who was already working in healthcare. So I was able to get a scholarship through, it was through the state of Ohio, because I went to school in Ohio, and it was also somehow related to, I can't remember the specifics of it, but it definitely had to do with being in healthcare and being a post-traditional student. So opportunities are just everywhere. The more that you reach out and say, hey, I have a question here, or how was the solution there? having to meet the financial obligation of an education is not new for, very few people. Many of us have struggled with that. So there are a lot of different, people who you can just say, hey, this is kind of the boat I'm in. What do you know, or what connections do you have? You would be really surprised what people would share. For BGSU, we also, we have a tuition scholarship, and then we offer a stipend. So we have graduate assistants this is for the on-site program. They will work as graduate students within the program. So there are just a wide range, whatever the student's interest is. So they can even do research, or they can help, instruct other classes, and they help with like creating, if we have like a big program or some type of a big meeting that's coming to campus, the students will work as graduate assistants to help the current instructors, and then they will earn a stipend through that. I also, one of my colleagues said that RDs who are working on a master's only, there can be employer reimbursement, and they can also go part-time to kind of soften the financial, blow from that perspective. And of course, there is also financial aid as well.
Great, thank you so much for that advice. So kind of going to the application process for Bowling Green, what are some things that your program looks for in a student that you guys think would make a good fit for your program?
Well, I would say probably my biggest pointer on that one would be that, because we really do pride ourselves on being somewhat of a, we know you personally program, we want to see authenticity in that personal statement. We want to make sure that, as I mentioned before, that we are a match for you as much as you are a match for us. And we also want to make sure that you know that you're in the right place. So it seems like most people that, it doesn't really matter what that journey looks like. When you land where you're supposed to be, you're just like, I'm finally, I know this is the right road for me. I know I'm on the right path. So we want to see that reflected in that personal statement. So those are really the main things that we look for. We come together as a faculty and look closely at the applications, personal statements, just overall GPA, and just look and see what students are going to be not only a match, for us to them, but for them back to us as well.
Do you guys also offer an interview process, or is it purely based on, I guess, like you said, the personal statement, resume, and GPA?
For the distance interns, we do an interview process. In the past, we've always done that by phone. I think with the changing ways of the world, that will likely be via Zoom now, so that we can have the pleasure of eye contact and a little bit more of a personal conversation when you can, look at people and talk in that way. So yes, the on-site interns, we typically do not have an interview. We take a fair number of our own interns, or our own undergraduate students. So we know the majority of those students, but we do mix a handful of other students from other universities that when we look at the application process, we're like, yeah, this looks like a good match. They look like they, really know, that they want to be here and that this is a good match for them.
Is there any particular reason why you don't interview those who are potentially coming on site?
The best probably explanation I can have is because we already know so many of the students that will end up coming. That would be the main reason why. That would be something probably moving forward, that if I talked to my colleagues and said, hey, do you think that we should, start interviewing face-to-face for, face-to-face via Zoom, I should say, with the incoming on-site group? Do you think that we should? And that is certainly something that we could change. And if a student, they can also call too, and they do that very often. They'll start out with an email and they'll ask a question to the current director, which has been CCing me in on those kinds of questions. And if they would like to meet, we certainly do, offer, hey, you'd like to talk this out a little bit more. We're always available to do that.
Great. And then, so you've had many real world experiences before coming into this position. So coming in May, or even now during your transition, what real world experiences do you want to pass on to your interns to make sure that they're as prepared as possible?
So when I think of my real world experience, I think of my clinical experience. So after I got my RD, then I worked briefly in an acute care center. And then from there, I switched to an LTAC, which is a long-term care acute center. So it's a hospital, LTACs are. And, back in the day, they always mostly focused on respiratory failure. So wouldn't you know it, that this little pandemic that is kind of going around is based upon respiratory failure. So I was on the COVID front lines in March and April of 2020. And I think it has permanently changed me in so many ways. And so, taking that real world experience back to the classrooms, my colleagues were like, Laura, can you build us a COVID case study? Laura, what are you seeing out in the real world? How can you help us, build our curriculum so that it looks more like, what the world looks like right now? And I certainly, was able to provide that not only, for my students, but for my colleagues and for, these students that, they're undergrads and that type of thing. So I think from another like real world experience, so BGSU, we are currently opening a nursing lab, which we are incredibly excited about. So we have a nursing program that we have always had that was actually taught in another location. And so we have brought that nursing program before the pandemic. We're in the process of bringing it back on campus. And now they have this teaching lab. And so we are so excited about working on that interpersonal education. So we call it IPE. In the real world, we call it the interdisciplinary or the IDT team. So mixing the IDT team and getting students, we've got the College of Health and Human Service, we've got speech and language, we have social work, we have nursing, we have medical laboratory science, and we're bringing those students together and giving them case studies and letting them say, see how, when you get out in the real world, you have your expertise and you have your, professional training, but it really truly does take everyone, and it takes collaboration and understanding that, you might understand the dietetics of it, but someone else understands, the social features of it in a different way and with different depth than what you do. You need to be willing to reach out to those people. And so we're teaching them that at this educational level. I feel like that's where I got my real world training of going, oh, you mean I can actually like call speech and language and ask him a question? Like, yeah, you're supposed to, go talk to pharmacy about, whatever issue you may have. And I guess I kind of missed that. So now with this IPE or this interprofessional education, we are going to, be teaching students, at the grassroots level, get your IDT team involved.
Great. Well, on behalf of like everybody, thank you for, your hard work with COVID. I mean, everybody thinks the nurses and the doctors, but there's so many other people behind the scenes. So I'm sure you saw some terrifying things, but thank you for being, there and helping the people who needed it. So
thank you for the thank you. That means a lot.
You're welcome. So I guess my final question is, what advice would you have for students who are going to be applying for Diecast this upcoming iteration?
I would say, and this is going to be the internship director in me, take a breath. You're okay. It's going to be okay. What's supposed to happen is going to happen. I just had a student come to me the other day because a plan that they had made did not fall in line the way that they wanted it to. And I said, you know what? It's happening the way it's supposed to happen. It might not be your plan, but it is the plan. So I specifically remember hitting that button on my Diecast, and I just thought that is it. It was so mean because when I went to hit the button and Diecast goes, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "No, I'm not sure." So I just hit the button anyways and just kind of left it to the universe and making sure that I did everything that I could. I followed all my instructions. I did everything, all the steps that Diecast said that they needed. I worked really hard in that undergrad. I got that GPA as high as I could. I made all the connections that I could. And, at a certain point, you do everything that you can. And then you just take a breath and you give yourself credit for things that you don't even know that you know. Like that's another thing I tell my interns is they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried. And I'm like, listen, you know more than you know. you know. So they really just kind of like take a breath. You can see those shoulders start to relax. And then they're like, okay, you're right. I can do this. And just one step forward, just one step at a time. It's a marathon. It's, a few chapters to make a volume.
Great. Thank you so much for taking time out and talking to us today. We're really excited to share this with students.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and good luck to everyone out there.